Hello, Miro.
Hello, how are you?
Hi there. Welcome to the podcast show.
Lovely to meet you.
Oh, great. Lovely to meet you as well. So I'll start by reading your bio. So Dr. Miro Griffiths is a disability scholar based in the School of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Leeds. His research is associated primarily with understanding disabled people's experience of resistance, activism, social movement participation, and advocacy. His contribution to existing bodies of literature has progressed ideas and theories about resistance, uh, resistance practices, and disabled people's pursuit for liberation. Dr. Miro Griffiths is also a policy advisor to governments, civil society organizations, research networks, and private enterprises. So welcome again, Miro.
It's great, lovely to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so I read on Wikipedia. I don't know how accurate it is because it's coming from Wikipedia, but it said that I'm quoting them now. It says at 13 years old, um, that you received a Millennium Award, which led to the conceptualized development of a computer game promoting disability equality, unquote. So how did that idea come about and how did that game work exactly?
All right. Well, I've always been interested in gaming. I think it's a wonderful experience and space for people to be really creative and also to engage with peers in ways that you couldn't do in the offline world. And I was offered an opportunity through a UK charity to apply for this scheme called the Millennium Award, which would give awards to young disabled people who wanted to pursue sort of social innovation, transformation opportunities. And I thought it was an opportunity to bridge together uh, experience and knowledge about disability and my interest and my love of gaming. So I worked with Sony PlayStation to develop the concept of this computer game. Obviously, it takes well, and it still does to make kind of major game investments. It takes a lot of money. So obviously, we didn't have the money to create the game itself, but we created the concept of the game, which was a way to take players through stories and narratives that would expose understanding of disability, and to also think about the importance of inclusion and accessibility. So some of the levels would have you navigating in accessible spaces and to think about what you need in order to build accessible environments, how to challenge negative and prejudiced attitudes towards disabled people, and to think about what disabled people need in terms of technologies and support in order to live valued lives and to be part of your communities that you want to be part of. So yeah, it was a fun project and an award to have over a few years. And of course, we couldn't make the game, but it was just an opportunity to really think creatively about how to highlight the importance of disabling worlds and the need to remove disabling worlds so disabled people can have value and participation in society.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I brought that up because, lots of young people and even older people love playing games, computer games, and, people with disabilities, a lot of them are no different. We're all just people and children with disabilities as well. They love playing games and be included in things such as video games. So maybe if you're interested, someday you could if you have more interest in it, develop it into an actual game.
It would be, yeah, that would be great. I mean, and I think it raised the importance of representation because often I view lots of social media platforms where you have disabled people talking about their gaming experiences, as you rightly kind of point to the significance that gaming has within the lives of disabled people, and often what you find is many comments about how there is lack of representation of disabled characters who are used in a way where they are prominent to the story. They're not used in stereotypical ways around disabled people's communities. So I think it's really important that we think about a the representation of disabled characters within gaming, but also think about how to use the gaming platform as a way to highlight the important issues facing disabled people communities, such as accessibility and participation.
Yeah, exactly. I think representation in all facets of life for people with disabilities is still very much lacking, which I know you know very well. Speaking of disability, so what is your disability for listeners who are not familiar, and how does it affect your day-to-day life?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and it's the answer is a bit more complicated as a sociologist who's interested in disability, because as a disabled person, my understanding and my experience of disability is what's being imposed upon me. So often when people say to me, what's your disability?" I kind of point to the inaccessible barriers and restrictions that have been imposed upon me by the way society is organized. And that's imposed on me because I have an impairment or a health condition. So my health condition impairment is a neuromuscular condition. It's called spinal muscular atrophy, and it affects muscle strength from the neck down. So I use a power wheelchair all times. I have very limited movement, just a little bit of movement in my neck and my fingers, but I rely on and require access to personal assistants. So I have 24-hour personal assistants who support me in all aspects of my daily routine, and to be kind of living the life that I want, and engaging in the spaces and in the networks and communities that I want to be a part of. Um, but I also rely on a vast array of technologies, such as medical devices and assistive aids, in order to move around and keep me as well as possible, and to manage my needs. But I think it's really important that, and again, I say this as a sociologist interested in disability, is that we think about disability as the unnecessary restrictions that have been imposed upon people who have impairments and health conditions, and we think about the disabling environments that we have. Of course, we all have health conditions that will affect will provide aspects of either limitations or requirements for particular ways to live our life, so we are as comfortable as possible. But we should never, assume that the barriers that we face in society is due to the way that our bodies work or our minds process information. It's due to the way society is being organized. And as an activist and as a scholar, I always think it's important to kind of place that understanding of disability within how society is organized, and it's organized in ways that don't meet our needs. And I think it's really important that we do all we can to resist and challenge that, and to think about, well, how do we want the world to be organized so we don't experience these disabling barriers?
I love that you're a big proponent of the social model, I know. And it's true, at some point in our life, we have to question a lot of what we learn in the mainstream social script, and one of which being, the social model and the environment being really not built for people like us. And question, instead of internalizing that it's our issue and our problem and our disability, normalizing it, and then also seeing the issues of the mainstream social script that's in place that we've internalized.
I completely agree. I think it's really important because so often, and even I experienced it when I was younger, before I had a political and social consciousness around disability as a social justice issue. Before that, I went through processes of internalizing it and blaming myself for the restrictions I experienced, and being very frustrated with that. And as you say, it's important that we become aware of that, and don't blame ourselves, but point to the social organization of societies to say, well, we could do things differently. We can do things better, and it doesn't just benefit disabled people, it benefits all people and all communities who are struggling to have their needs met and to be valued and be able to participate in communities and in spaces that they want to belong to.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for us to be frustrated and angry because there's so much to be frustrated and angry about. But you've channeled it in such a productive way with educating, with building coalitions, working with DPOs, disabled people's organizations, and That's just very admirable. Before we maybe go further down the rabbit hole on that, I was wondering, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more of your personal background with us? Just what do your parents do? Do you have any siblings in terms of any other types of information you would like to share to get a fuller picture of you?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think I live a fairly mundane life. I think mundane and ordinary lives are wonderful things and things that many disabled people don't have access to. But I live a fairly ordinary life, or what I think to be an ordinary life. But so my parents, we never really experienced severe impairments within the family, or kind of experience of disabling societies and disabling social worlds. Um, I have an older brother who's 10 years older than me. And really by the time I was 8, he was leaving for university. So I didn't really spend a lot of time with him, although we did have, family holidays and things like that. So but both my parents never had any experience of disability at all. My father's he's retired now. He was an aerospace engineer. My mother was a kind of writer in the creative arts, and is originally from Slovenia, a very small country in former Yugoslavia in Europe. Um, so when I was born, and obviously I uh, started to display my impairment, my health condition, my parents were understandably quite disorientated and overwhelmed, and they always talk about how their experience of trying to understand my needs was through this medical lens, where I was seen as being, my body was deviant, my body was different, it was undesirable to have such a condition. It was very fatalistic, and deeply kind of rooted in that deficit model of assuming that all conversations and all perspectives and all interactions was about the deficiencies that I had as a child, in inverted commas, not to be a normal child. Um, but my parents were by chance really exposed to the social model of disability, independent living philosophy, and of course, independent living has become corrupted. As a side note, it's become corrupted to mean doing things for yourself on your own, which I think is equally a toxic narrative to have. But independent living in a disability philosophy sense is having sufficient support to do the things that you want to do with your life and have choice and control and self-determination. So they were introduced to the social model and the independent living philosophy very early on, and that then opened them up to a whole different narrative around the importance of inclusion and accessibility and participation. Um, and then that led to my parents campaigning for me to go to the local non-segregated school, to receive the right level of support. And all this has been a battle and a challenge, all the way through my life. But my parents were quite active, not being activists with a capital A, but just being conscious of the need to think about disability as a social justice issue, and to recognize the importance of families and disabled people fighting for their entitlements and their rights, and the importance of support so that you can go to school, that you can have opportunities to participate in your communities, you can make friends. My parents were told I wasn't allowed access to a power wheelchair until I was about 6 or 7. But they campaigned, and I had my first power chair at 3 years old, because they said, you know, if you look around and Mira's peers will be moving around whenever they want, they'll be making connections and interactions, and Mira shouldn't have to depend on somebody to be available to push him around in order to meet those spaces. He should be able to drive his own chair and determine the social networks and the relationships that he wants to have, just as anybody else should be able to engage in play and so on. So that importance of social justice was a kind of running theme through my family. And of course, that then put me in good steps for then demanding access to sufficient support and personalized support, so I could manage my own support needs as I grew up, and as I went to university, and then obviously to work and have family and so on.
That's wonderful to advocate. The next question was going to be, what did your parents do right in advocating for you growing up? And it sounds like you've already answered parts of that with your parents, advocating for an electric wheelchair at 3 years old. Was there anything else that you want to elaborate on for that question?
Well, and a good example was my parents wanted me to go to the local primary school. So, the school that we have up to the age of 11, and it wasn't accessible. And the local education authority wanted me to go to a segregated school, what's sometimes referred to as special schools. And my parent, there's a story where my mum goes around to the head teacher of the local primary school and says, these are Mira's needs. You need to have this all in place by the time he arrives after nursery, and you need to have a one-to-one support worker. And my mum, in a very kind of officious Eastern European voice, told them that this needs to happen. And within a few years, they'd set it all up. So when I left nursery and I was going into primary school, all the support was put in place. And because that support was wrapped around me and it wasn't kind of framed as this special intervention, it just meant that I could then engage with my peers and form relationships. And this classroom became a very inclusive space because students, my peers, would help me just in almost like in a natural, organic way, rather than separating the disabled child out to say, this person has very specific needs and therefore they're seen as different in the classroom. Actually, it was a way of kind of creating a culture of everybody needs support, because we all do, whether you're disabled or not, we all rely on each other to live the life that we want or we can live. And that was, an example of what manifested within the schooling environment very organically. And again, that's been a kind of important note that my parents have always emphasized in me as a child was, we should be embracing the notion of support. Often people become very, and I think this happens a lot in disabled people's community, is that we become trapped in trying to demonstrate this self-sufficiency and individual responsibility. We can do all these things on our own. And actually that's, for me, that's a really toxic narrative, because growing up, the emphasis was on recognize that we all need support and we all need to help each other and support each other. And I have a physical impairment. I have a non-disabled partner, but she requires support from me in ways that I can provide support to her, and I require support from her in ways that I can't provide that. So again, it's the importance of recognizing we're all supporting each other, and that was a really important message that my parents instilled in me, that we should embrace the notion of interdependency, that you rely on others as much as they rely on you.
Yeah, that's a great message. And bravo to your mom for being such an assertive advocate and making sure that everything was lined up when you were ready to go to school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, her and my father, they fought for many years, and they're still quite prominent and active in their local communities. My mum and dad are retired now, so usually you'll find my mum marching around to the bakery to get a loaf of cornbread in the morning. She's not necessarily shouting at the schools anymore.
So you just mentioned that you have a partner who's non-disabled. Do you have any advice for young people in terms of dating and navigating the, intimate relation space with a disability? I know for many people, especially those of us with a disability, there isn't as much like healthy media portrayal out there, and it's difficult to find someone who have personal experience and who's willing to share some helpful information in that area.
Yeah, so I've been with my partner for I think it's coming up to 8 years now, and we've lived together for the majority of those years, and bought a house and so on, and we have a dog. But I think, when we were dating, it was interesting because my partner had never really um, experienced kind of disabled friends or a disabled partner. We met through online dating, and I didn't reveal to her that I had an impairment, and I did that deliberately because, for me, I thought, because, as you said, there's so much um, kind of poor representation. There's so many prejudiced attitudes towards the idea of disabled people dating. I wanted to release that information in a considered way and careful way. So I wanted to kind of present this image of this is who I am, and then explain the importance of my support that I need to live my life, and the recognition that, I do live a life where there are many restrictions imposed upon me because of the way that society is organized. And when I told her that, because again, with online dating, I kind of liken it to old-fashioned letter writing and pen pal writing and so on. You build up a relationship over messages initially. So after a few weeks, I decided that I was going to tell her that I had an impairment, and then hopefully the foundation of who I am had already been set in place. And when I told her, her response was, "Oh, I knew that from the first minute because when I saw your profile picture, I could tell you were sitting in a wheelchair from the kind of the angle of the photograph." And then she told me that she Googled me and she found all my details anyway, so she knew who I was from the first moment. And actually, it was a really important message because it showed that, through building this organic relationship, uh, Emma was able to kind of dispel all those prejudiced assumptions that even I had about, how you're going to, what the notion of impairment and health is going to play in trying to form a relationship. So what I would say is, is be very open about, um, what your life is like, and set that out for transparency, because I think in any relationship, disability or non or in terms of disability being part of a relationship or not, all relationships should be founded on transparency. Um, but I think it's about, revealing the information when you're comfortable, um, but also recognizing that there are many people out there who are not kind of rooted in that voyeuristic notion of being fascinated by questions of impairment and health condition. There'll be many people who are very respectful and empathetic, and will want to build a relationship where we all feel comfortable, and we all want to engage in things that feel comfortable, and we'll be able to navigate those barriers that are difficult, but we'll do it as a team. And relationships is about teamwork. So, my partner is very used to thinking creatively about how do we manage different needs, and how do we manage different environments that are not very accessible. Um, and I think, as anybody who's disabled and wants to engage in dating, it's about having confidence to feel that you are worthwhile, and everybody is worthwhile, and everybody has value to another person. And it's about just trying to navigate those inaccessible spaces until you meet somebody who is deeply empathetic and deeply understanding of your needs, and together you'll make that relationship work through teamwork, and you'll also be able to recognize the importance of supporting each other. The key message also is, I think, is to be aware that many people will hold prejudiced views about, how can you be in a relationship together, or, how does this aspect of a relationship work? And, if you're a private person, you don't want to reveal that, then that's completely understandable, and you should feel comfortable in what you want to reveal to other people, and never feel that you need to justify or explain why you're in a relationship, or justify why you want a relationship. Everybody should be entitled to a relationship if they want to pursue one.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as you know very well by now, each relationship has its challenges. No relationship is perfect. Do you think the dynamic between a person in a relationship with a disability and without a disability is more or less the same as, say, two people without a disability, or is it more nuanced in this challenges that you two have to grapple with?
I think there are nuanced challenges. So, for example, I have 24-hour assistants, personal assistants. I don't want Emma to be responsible for meeting all my needs in the life that I want to have, because that will obviously affect the things that she wants to do with her life as an individual person, but also as a partner in a relationship. So, for example, we have to navigate a space where there is sometimes three of us in this area, such as me, Emma, and one of my PAs who is working that shift. So, the private home becomes also a workplace for somebody as a PA. It also becomes a space where we have to think carefully about when we want to have privacy and intimacy without having PAs around. So again, it's about trying to figure out what works for you, and there's no blueprint or template for how to do things right. It's just determining, and we do this, all of us do this in kind of pursuing a relationship. It's just determining what feels manageable and what works best in the nuance of your own relationship, and that's why discussions and not hiding things, and when we feel that something isn't working very well, we'll have very open and honest conversations about, well, what do we need to do to make sure we both feel okay. And one of our main principles in our relationship is always checking in and saying, are you okay? And if something is not okay, then we need to raise that, and we need to figure out a way how to support each other to address that. And again, that should be reflective of all relationships. But I think when you're disabled, because you've got an assemblage of individuals supporting you, maybe work support workers, you've got technologies and equipment. You can't be as spontaneous because you've got to micromanage your environment to make sure it's as accessible as possible. These things aren't a problem. They're just things that we need to maybe think about in order to organize a relationship which feels then really wonderful and really loving and adorable and so on. And yeah, like any relationship, it takes time, and you work it out, and things will change and circumstances will change. But my key message is always, don't feel that you have to hide things, talk them out, and you'll be able to figure out what's the best solution. Because as disabled people, we are arguably one of the best problem solvers, because we are constantly in environments where we say, this doesn't work for us, this is being imposed on us, it's not necessary, and we're constantly trying to rework our spaces and our dynamics and our relationships to figure out a way to address that. And you need to use that in your relationship as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because we live in an environment that's not built for us, right? And it sounds like, relationships for people with disabilities, communication is even more key. It's already very, very emphasized in all relationships. But for those of us with disabilities, that is especially crucial. I want listeners to take what they think is useful because each disability is so different.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's why it's really important never to assume that there is a kind of magic list to abide by, or a template, or a blueprint. For me, it's those principles of talking things out, recognizing that you have value, um, recognizing that the importance of transparency and being open with each other. And these are things that we would generally hold in relationships anyway. And if that's what you're naturally orientated towards, those principles, then test them out in the spaces that you live your life in. But I think the important question is that everybody should have access to relationships if that's what they want. And there's nobody who should be feeling that they don't deserve a relationship, or that their impairment is deeply problematic to the point where a relationship couldn't be sustained. Everybody can have relationships, and it's just important to feel confident in that, and then also to think about, how do I want to live my life where I'm comfortable and my needs are met, and I can also have that role as a partner.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. What do you think are the top three factors that are impeding individuals with disabilities life progress today in terms of, say, it could include romantic relationships, as we were just talking about, career, pursuing meaningful friendships. How can we work towards getting rid of obstacles that are in existence for people with disabilities in these areas and more?
I suppose I'll probably approach this through my kind of sociological lens, as a sociologist. For me, the first one is making sure people have sufficient support. I think one of the biggest obstacles is that disabled people don't have access to support that is sustainable, that is related to the things they want to do with their life, and that they have enough um, social security, support provision, access to independent living services, and so on, assistive technologies, in order to live a life that they want. And so for me, the first obstacle is how to make sure disabled people have their needs met, so that they can then pursue the things that are of interest to them, or that they want to pursue in terms of either communities or things to do with your day or participation, say in either labor market or learning or community activities and so on. So the first one for me is making sure people have sufficient support. The second, I think, is the importance of inclusive education. We have education systems around the world that tolerate the exclusion of disabled people, and this can never be justified. And often people assume that the answer that I'm proposing is just to make sure that all disabled and non-disabled people are learning together, but that assumes that the existing arrangements that we have for education is what we want to continue with. And I think if you look around the globe, education systems don't work effectively because we've corrupted ideas of knowledge. We've created lots of pressure through testing and regulations, and we've kind of drawn out the ideas of creativity and experimentation that are so important to education. We've taken them out of the curriculum. So for me, when I talk about inclusive education, I want us to think really creatively about how to create spaces where we can learn and gain knowledge and gain creative skills and opportunities to experiment with really fascinating ideas that are pertinent to the social world organization. So I think and building the importance of inclusion within that is key. So I think the second obstacle for me would be how to build sustainable, inclusive education spaces where people or everybody is recognized as being able to participate in learning, have value, and their voice matters in pursuing education or pursuing learning or having a presence within the exchange of knowledge. And then I think the final obstacle for me would be the importance of political consciousness. As I said at the beginning, it's so important to understand disability as a social justice issue, and not to assume that you are the problem as an individual, and also not to kind of chase this idea of being normal, because I think what a kind of consciousness around disability as a social justice issue provides you with is an opportunity to say, actually, this is about respecting and valuing all variations of human existence. We have health conditions, we have impairment effects, we have ways in which our minds process information and our bodies work, and we should be trying to embrace all variations of that and to recognize that we all have value and we all should be able to participate in the spaces that we want to participate in. And I think that comes from having a consciousness of disability as a social justice issue. But so many people, as you talked about at the beginning, don't have that recognition, and they internalize it and blame themselves and so on. So I think it's really important that we're doing all we can to ensure that disabled people's communities across the globe resist those ideas, those toxic ideas that you are the problem, or that you should be trying to strive for this notion of normal, and to recognize that inclusive and accessible worlds and communities are built on principles of participation and value for all, and recognizing that we all have a place in the worlds that we live in.
Very well said. Thank you. So with the next question, unfortunately, as you can probably see on the screen, we have less than around 3 minutes. So the next question, the next answer will have to be brief, but I would love a 40-minute answer on this, however. What progress are you personally most proud of in your lifetime towards the well-being of people with disabilities?
Well, that's a hard question to ask. I mean, asking me to judge my own life and work is pretty tough. I suppose, I'm really interested in activism, and I'm really proud of all the spaces that I've belonged to in order to either demand resistance, to challenge injustice, or to support other people to have a presence. And when you're a scholar, a lot of your work is to try to inform future generations in order to have the knowledge and then have the insights into making social change and making social transformation. So my hope is that, well, I suppose my hope is that when I look at my work, it's useful to somebody. And I think, a lot of the time I always, I am of the view that a lot of the things that I demand in terms of social justice, I won't experience myself because it takes so much time to change to make social change. But we don't do it for ourselves. We do it for future generations, and we are desperately trying to gain that knowledge, articulate those ideas, and give future generations hope that social change is possible because it is possible. But we are doing it not for ourselves. We're doing it for the future generations of activists and disabled people who want to embrace and experience a better world because a better world is possible. So my hope is that my work is useful to somebody at least.
Yeah, and I appreciate your optimism and persistence and for being in the weeds and doing the hard work. Because, like you said, social change takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And oftentimes we don't see the results for quite some time into the future. So, how can people follow you and your work online for those who are interested?
Well, I have a very unusual name in terms of having a Slovene first name and a Welsh surname. So if people Google me, Miro Griffiths, Miro being Miro, you often find me straight away because I can't find anybody else with my name. So you can always Google me. I'm on LinkedIn if people are on LinkedIn, and I'm also on social media platforms like X and other spaces. But my email address is public, and I welcome anybody to email me and have chats if that's of interest or use to their work.
Great. Thank you so much, Miro. It's been a pleasure talking to you and for being so willing to share some of the more personal aspects of your life as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I don't want us to get timed out.
Okay, take care. It was lovely talking to you.
You too. All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.